You're listening to David Rising, A Jewish Lion Awakens.
Opening scene. Master of the Universe. David sat at his desk in the bustling office of Oak Haven Capital, the company he had founded and grown over the past 15 years. Unrolled blueprints covered his desk. An Upper West Side luxury tower near the Met, a Williamsburg waterfront redevelopment already courting Qatari investment, a Tribeca penthouse with an NVA client in escrow. Each project was a statement piece, proof that under David's lead, Oak Haven had grown from boutique startup to an insider's powerhouse, discreet, coveted, always one step ahead. These were the deals murmured over cocktails at the Core Club, floated between bites of Wagyu at Reserve Cut and invite-only rooftop galas. The kind of portfolio that made real money lean in. David's sharp mind, relentless work ethic, and Ivy League swagger had earned him more than just admiration. He was the one everyone wanted to invest with. His phone buzzed. Another missed family dinner. Miriam's text was gentle but pointed. Rachel's play at the JCC started 20 minutes ago. She keeps looking at the empty seat next to me. David sighed. He glanced at the family photo on his desk, taken years ago when Rachel was still small enough to sit on his shoulders. They had been walking through Central Park after Sunday bagels. Rachel was scared of the crowd, so he hoisted her onto his shoulders, told her she was the captain of the ship. Miriam had captured the moment just as he steadied her, Rachel's tiny hands clutching his forehead. He had felt like a king then, like a protector. When was the last time he'd done something like that? The frame sat next to a thick stack of contracts, a fine film of dust settling across both the frame and the contracts. The intercom crackled. Mr. Marks, the investors for the Hudson project are waiting in the conference room. David swallowed. His eyes flicked to the clock, then back to his calendar. I'll be right there, he said, straightening his tie. He paused at the door, looking first toward the framed picture, then out the tall windows to the clear blue sky beyond. Something tugged at him, but he couldn't name it. That uneasy feeling again, the muscles in his stomach tightening. He steadied himself. There was no time for that now. The investors were waiting, and in David's world, time was money. He walked down the hallway toward the conference room, past framed awards and oversized photographs of his real estate holdings that tracked his rise. His Ferragamo shoes barely made a sound on the perfectly polished floor. He had become like that. Present, but not present. Successful, but not successful. Alive, but not quite living. Somewhere deep inside he knew. In building his empire, he had lost touch with his own life, his family, his time, and even himself. Scene 2. Another sleepless night. That night, after a long day, David lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, sensing himself at a crossroads. The business kept growing. More calls, more clients, more meetings, more expectations. It had been months since he had truly slept. He groaned and turned onto his side, trying to avoid what he knew deep down. It wasn't the pressure of the business that was squeezing him. It was the quiet ache of being a stranger in his own home. He turned to his left and looked at Miriam. She always seemed to want more. Clothing, jewelry, a better car, a bigger house. When was the last time they had even shared a simple cup of coffee, let alone a real conversation? He sighed, trying to push away what he knew in his gut. It wasn't things she was longing for. It was him. A line from some forgotten argument drifted back now, soft and sharp, all at once. At least when you buy me things, I feel you love me. He had brushed it off then, hearing only the surface of the words. Now, in the stillness of his bed, he heard the ache beneath them, a desperate reaching for something she could no longer name. She hadn't been asking for more. She had been asking for him. But he hadn't known that. He thought providing was how you proved love. And to provide, he had to withdraw, deeper into work, into pressure, into the chase. Each gift she requested was really a question. Are you still here? Do I still matter? But he had heard it as pressure, and so he pulled further away. Now, he didn't know how to fix it. He turned to his right. Only the blank white wall stared back, stark, empty, like his own life. The glare of the alarm clock cut through the darkness, its oversized red numbers waiting to flash and beep. Another night, barely a wink of sleep. A thought floated up from somewhere deeper. A few weeks ago, Isaac had said something, almost in passing, like a seed planted without fanfare. They had been standing in the hallway after a long meeting, coffee cups in hand, faces worn from exhaustion. David had made some offhand comment about never sleeping anymore. Couldn't sleep either, he had said. Started going to the early minyan, morning prayers at the shul. At the time, David had laughed inwardly, another dreamer, completely out to lunch. But now, better to move than lie there waiting for that shrill alarm to remind him of everything he didn't know how to fix. It was still dark out, when for reasons he still didn't understand, David found himself driving through the pre-dawn streets, toward the small shul he'd driven past 1,000 times, but never entered. Third scene. Arriving at shul for the first time. When he arrived at shul, something unexpected. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head. A Jew's day begins with acknowledging who really runs the world. As he crossed the threshold into the Beit Midrash, it came again. Who really runs the world? Is it you or something more? The atmosphere inside was different, the kind of different you feel more than you see. It reminded him of an old movie, edges of the frame slightly blurred, light crackling, air sparkling into a soft glow. The air felt charged, like it was carrying something ancient, something sacred. He stood there for a second, not sure what to do.
He felt like he had stumbled into a scene from 2,000 years ago.
Men, wrapped in white talit, with small black boxes tied to their heads, moved around the room. Not rushing, not distracted, almost floating. Someone with a thick white beard caught his eye, gave him a smile, nodded him toward a seat in the back. David slid into the seat, exhaled. At least he could tuck away here, unnoticed. In this place, he thought, you didn't need to believe in God. You could feel the energy in the room. It was just there, undeniable. He leaned back, let himself settle, tried to keep his eyes open. Ironically, after so many sleepless nights, he dozed off without meaning to. A rustle woke him, the sound of men rising to their feet. At the front, a man tapped gently on the bima, the Amidah, the 18 blessings. The room shifted. Everyone stood and waited. David's brow furrowed. He leaned toward the older man beside him and whispered, "Why is everyone just standing still?" Inside, he was really thinking, "They woke me up for this?" The man leaned in, his voice gentle but steady. "We're not just praying. We're syncing up, waiting for the moment night becomes day, darkness becomes light, aligning with Hashem's rhythm." Then, as the sun broke through the windows, the men began to whisper. A flicker of memory, his grandfather, whispering, feet together. Ah, thought David, this was what he had been doing. David stood there, watching, not moving. Like discovering a hidden algorithm, he began to see it. This moment, when night turned into day, that's when they prayed. The darkest moment came just before first light. If you could align with that shift, when the darkness became light, maybe your soul could rise with it. He'd never seen prayer this way, not as words, but as rhythm, as timing, as transformation. This wasn't random. This wasn't mechanical. It was a dance, precise, deliberate, timed with something larger than the day itself. A sacred pattern, pulsing beneath the noise. It was the opposite of how he lived, not pushing harder or running faster, just showing up in sync with something deeper, something eternal. Maybe it wasn't all about building. Maybe it was about aligning. And for the first time, he wondered if this was what he'd been missing. Maybe, he thought, there were rhythms in the world he had never even noticed. David stood there, not moving. Something hit him hard. The precision, the coordination. There was a whole system here, not made by men, not taught in business school, one he'd never seen, one that had been running quietly, faithfully in the background of Jewish life. A sacred order, not invented, revealed, and for a man who had built his life on intellect, who prided himself on knowing it all, that realization knocked the wind out of him. Fourth scene. Second time at shul. The next night, David couldn't sleep again. Unbelievable, he muttered, tossing the blanket off. Enough. He arrived at shul earlier this time. Still dark out, barely 5 a.m. Inside, a rabbi in a plain black suit and white shirt sat at the head of a long plastic table. 3 men surrounded him, coffee cups in hand, seemingly hanging on to every word. Pathetic, thought David, like puppies waiting for a treat. Can't they think for themselves? He muttered under his breath. I'm a modern man, he thought. I build, I win, I get my news from the Wall Street Journal, not an old man reading an ancient book. He tugged at the cuffs of his Canali shirt, stood a little taller. These guys, nodding like sheep over styrofoam cups, let them sit there with their bad coffee. Not me. I'm out here learning how the real world works. Money, strategy, power. He pulled out his smartphone, thumb hovering over the Wall Street Journal app. But as he did, a bright light from the ceiling reflected off the screen, catching his eye and pulling his gaze upward. When he looked up, he caught sight of an enormous chandelier dangling from the vaulted ceiling, its crystals sparkling like frozen stars. David stared. Wow, he thought to himself. The crystals on that thing alone must have cost $100K. By now, he had forgotten about his smartphone. He scanned the room again, this time with slower eyes. The air of quiet, established wealth hanging in the room had slowed his mind just enough to really take in the scene around him. The place was actually quite nice. The rabbi's shirt wasn't just plain, it was crisp, immaculate. His black suit wasn't flashy, but it fit him like he belonged to another era, one where dignity wasn't something you bought. The rabbi's face was warm, steady, kind. And that mural, stained glass stretching across the front wall, vines, fruit, pomegranates, grape, alive with color, reaching upward toward a star. That too must have cost a fortune, thought David. At least these guys put their money where their mouth is. David reconsidered, perhaps not so pathetic after all. Fifth scene. David's first time praying in shul. When the rabbi's class ended, people began filing into the Beit Midrash for morning prayers. Tired from little sleep, weary from work stress, David found his way back to the same chair. He sank in. Automatically, he reached for his phone. then reconsidered. Probably not a great look, he thought. Don't want to get glares from the rest of the guys here. The men around him began to rise. So, nothing else to do, David stood too. At that moment, a man, a few seats over, turned and handed him a siddur. David took it and froze. It was the same prayer book his grandfather had used. Same exact cover, same tattered spine, same fading title, Siddur Ahavat Shalom. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He almost let out an audible sigh and choked back tears. He blinked it away. He could see it now, his grandfather clutching that very siddur like it was a limb, always with him, weddings, Shabbos, Shiva houses, Kiddushes. He never walked into a room without it. When he died, it was relegated to the old wooden shelf in David's father's study, never touched, but always there. That's uncanny, thought David, his mind shifting quickly into academic detachment, steadying himself and bringing himself back to his cool, detached demeanor. Just a coincidence. Happens all the time. There are probably thousands of these still floating around. But really, he couldn't shake the thought. It looked like it was somehow Grandpa Shlomo's exact prayer book, passed down through a portal in time and space. He tightened his jaw. Get a grip, man. The old man had opened the siddur for him. To fit in, David followed along. The words felt familiar, surprisingly so. That's funny. My Hebrew stuck with me. Still got it, he thought smugly, straightening his collar and adjusting the knot in his tie. Didn't forget a thing. But something stirred beneath the arrogance and self-congratulation. A strange sense, like the words weren't just remembered, like they were returning, waiting, patient and undisturbed, just beneath the surface, as if his soul had known them before his mind did, as if something ancient within him had been holding them all this time, quietly waiting for him to come back. Around him, the room pulsed with a hidden rhythm. The men around him stood with open siddurim, murmuring softly, some swaying, some still, a few with eyes closed, each absorbed in a private, invisible conversation. When they reached the Amidah, everything slowed. The room went silent. The men began to sway, not fast, not dramatic, but as if something unseen had brushed through the room, moving them all at once. David stood too and read silently. Somewhere between the third and fourth blessing, he felt it. Not a jolt, not a shout, just a change. Outside, the windows had softened. The night had pulled back like a curtain. A faint gold light seeped along the edges of the glass. And inside David's chest, the darkness had thinned. The heaviness he carried, it hadn't been torn away. It had lifted, like a prayer rising with the dawn. Afterwards, he stood still for a few minutes, stunned. What was that? He didn't know, didn't want to overthink it. Could be nothing. Busy day ahead, he said under his breath, bringing himself back to the familiar structure of thought and deadlines. Sixth scene. Back to his world. David stepped into his car, still holding the warmth from shul. His chest felt light. His breath came easier. But he knew better than to let himself get too out there. So he did what he always did. Tapped the screen, Spotify, news, the Bloomberg Minute. The voice came on immediately, mid-sentence. Projected earnings, slower hiring, revised GDP numbers. Perfect. Nothing like a dose of macroeconomic theater to pull him back. Back to the world he knew how to command. As he pulled out of the parking lot, muscle memory kicked in. Check phone, fire off an email, dictate a voice note. By the time he hit the West Side Highway, he'd replied to 11 messages, scheduled 3 calls, and ignored a message from Miriam, pretending he hadn't seen it. He pulled into the garage beneath the building he now owned, the same one where he'd once rented a one-room office. He exhaled, slow and steady. Checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Tie slightly off. He adjusted the knot, tugged each cuff, ran a hand down the front of his jacket, smoothing the crease with precision. There, back in control, back in the world he knew, master of the universe. Scene 7. Update on prayer habits. It kind of started to become a regular thing. He'd wake up restless, tossing, turning, turn toward Miriam, then that wall. He'd drag himself to the shul, same chair, same siddur, and each time, by the time he reached the end of the Amidah, it happened. The sadness, the heaviness, lifted. He began to notice how the others prayed, how no one rushed, how they stood still before stepping in to the Amidah, like men standing at the edge of something vast, waiting for the signal to enter. He didn't understand it yet, not fully, but he could feel it. Maybe these dreamers understood something he hadn't learned in business school.
Scene 8. The noon crash and midday pick-me-up. The morning prayers were doing something. He didn't want to overstate it, but they were. His steps were lighter. The mornings didn't feel quite so heavy. But by noon, it would fade. That thin layer of lightness he'd picked up in shul would start to wear off. Somewhere between the 3rd meeting and the 5th unread email. His jaw tightened. His breath shallowed. It was like being pulled out of alignment. His body heavy. He was running uphill again. He approached this problem the way he approached everything else, systematically, of course. Identify the failure point. Find a lever. Test the hypothesis. If reading the books at shul helps me feel better, he thought, then logically, reading one here at the office should help too. He wasn't trying to have a religious experience. He just wanted the calm to last a little longer, to keep the morning from dissolving by lunch. You don't have to understand why it works, he told himself. You just do what works. Anything that gets rid of that sadness, that weight, that depressed feeling, anything that helps, that's a good thing. Then, one morning, something happened. He'd been thinking, maybe he needed one of those books at work too. Not a plan, not a decision, just a passing thought. And then, during davening, it appeared, tucked into the back pocket of the chair in front of him. A small book, Tehillim, faded leather, bent corners, pages that felt used. He slipped it into his jacket, figuring he'd bring it back. But each day he forgot. Or maybe something didn't let him remember. Now it was noon again. He felt the slip, the drop in altitude, that tilt into heaviness. And before he could overthink it, he was reaching, hand to the chest, jacket open, book in hand. Opened to wherever it landed, started reading, quiet, lips barely moving. Hebrew came back in flashes. Didn't matter what he understood. He read anyway.
The sharp edge of the day softened. His breath came back a little deeper.
A deal falls apart, and David starts asking new questions. He stared at the spreadsheet. The formulas were all correct. Everything added up, except the part where the profits disappeared. On 110th and Riverside Drive, David's team had worked an incredible deal to develop a 312-unit multifamily apartment building. It was going to change the neighborhood, generate huge returns. Except now, the city was trying to extract last-minute concessions, fees, rent controls. All of it would eat into the profits the investors were expecting. His temples pulsed, his inbox blinked. Should he pass the costs on to the investors or eat it himself? What was fair? What did the contract say? He flipped to the clause. Nothing useful. The questions came faster now, layered like voices shouting over one another. What's legal? What's smart? What keeps me afloat? What's fair? What keeps them happy? He had a meeting with the investors in 2 hours. Would he avoid the subject or bring it up? Maybe he could just... His phone buzzed. A message from Miriam. Don't forget, dinner's at 7 tonight. Just the two of us. I'm really looking forward. The meeting would run long. Another date night she had planned, missed. He'd have to cancel again. Her face flashed in his mind, hopeful. That small smile she used to save for him when she still believed he'd show up. His heart dropped. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. His body was tight, jaw locked, shoulders up near his ears. And then, from somewhere deeper, a different kind of question surfaced. What's right? He didn't want to cheat the investors, and he didn't want to cheat himself. Not anymore. He felt dizzy, tried to stand, reached for the coffee machine, stumbled. Too weak. He was unraveling. He placed a hand on the corner of his desk, pressed down like it might steady him. And then, without fully realizing it, his hand moved. Right breast pocket, fingers brushed the edge of the thin leather cover. He pulled it out, opened it without thinking. His fingers landed on Psalm 121. He started reading, efforting to get through one word at a time. As he moved across the page, the ancient words washed over him. He found himself in the battles of King David. A song for ascents. I shall raise my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help is from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian will not slumber. Behold, the guardian of Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shadow. By your right hand. By day, the sun will not smite you, nor will the moon at night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from now and to eternity. After praying, he felt more calm. He could feel the words wrapping him like a chainmail coat, giving him strength. He didn't have the answers yet, but something had shifted. The chaos loosened its grip. His breath came easier. His hand wasn't clenched anymore. He sat there holding the page. No brilliant strategy, no sudden clarity, just the quiet sense that maybe he wasn't doing this alone. When you learn, God talks to you. The piece from saying Psalm 121 a few minutes ago still held. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in his chest softened. He felt lighter, but still, the spreadsheet numbers echoed in the back of his mind. Then, his thoughts took an unexpected turn. How would the men at Shul handle this? And what about all the generations before him? He pictured them lined up before dawn, talit draped over their shoulders, unmoved by forecasts or deadlines. And his grandfather? He would have pulled out a sefer. David's eyes landed on the Shulchan Aruch resting on his desk. He reached for it. His friend Moshe had given it to him at Shul. It was beautiful, bound in leather, lined in gold. The kind of thing you display on your desk to impress a client, which is exactly why he put it there. But now, it wasn't a decoration. It felt like a doorway. The binding cracked as he opened it. Dense text, unfamiliar layout, lines of commentary curling down the page like an eternal conversation. There's got to be an answer in here somewhere, he said to himself. What is the right thing to do here? Do I pass the cost on to them or eat it myself? Deep down, it felt like this book knew more about life than any of his consultants or analysts or mentors combined. Somehow, these rabbis from centuries ago seemed to have thought of every possible situation. He began to read, slowly, haltingly, a few lines at a time. He didn't follow it all, not even most of it, but still, something happened. A strange lightness crept in, barely noticeable at first, like a window had opened somewhere inside of him. He read a few more lines, still didn't understand, but the weight in his chest, it wasn't as heavy. That week, he began to notice things. The men at Shul who studied the halacha, they were different, happier, calmer, more grounded, more refined. Even Jake, the notorious hothead from the real estate board, had softened since he'd started learning. At first, David brushed it off. Coincidence, age maybe, maturity. But then he remembered what Moshe had said after Minyan, the morning he had handed him the Shulchan Aruch. I was inspired to buy you the Shulchan Aruch while I was learning Likutei Maharan. Moshe reached into a white paper shopping bag and pulled out the book. Holding it with both hands, he presented it to David with quiet pride. Moshe leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing something precious. Rebbe Nachman taught that learning halacha, Jewish law, refines a person's character. I didn't understand it at first, he admitted, so I asked questions. He stirred his coffee and continued. The word halacha comes from holech, to walk. It's not just law, it's a way to walk with God, a path, a direction. Today people say Jewish law, but it's so much deeper than that. Rebbe Nachman reveals a secret. When prayer is combined with learning halacha, it changes the soul, literally, and that shift affects your life directly. Rebbe Nachman's teaching is very deep. I don't have time to explain it now, but here, I printed this for you. He handed him a stack of paper. These were Moshe's handwritten notes, David realized, with a mixture of awe and excitement. One photocopy caught his eye, a page from a book highlighted in yellow with notes scrawled in the margins. The page contained one of Rebbe Nachman's famous metaphors. David read, "The Torah is called a garden. The Jewish souls who delve into and understand the Torah are the various types of grasses which grow in the garden. And when the fountain of wisdom from prayer is drawn to the garden, the Torah, then it causes the grasses, the Jewish souls, to grow." In other words, the Jewish souls grow in the garden. They gain understanding and intelligence of the Torah. Then they merit delving into the depths of the law in order to determine the correct law, the permitted, kosher, and pure from the impure, unkosher, and forbidden. By doing so, they separate the good from the bad. By clarifying the law, the bad is separated out of 4 elements. By clarifying the law, the bad is separated out of the 4 elements. Only the good remains. By clarifying the law, the bad is separated out of the 4 elements. Only the good remains. Likutei Maharan 8:7, Sefaria.org. After reading, David looked confused. Moshe reached over and touched David's arm lightly, enough to say, "Hey, I'm with you," then went on. Moshe reached over and touched David's arm lightly, enough to say, "I'm with you," then went on. "Don't worry about all the details right now. I can explain later. But I figured I'd just bring you the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and let you see for yourself." He looked David in the eye and smiled. "Just remember this. Pray first. Ask Hashem for wisdom. The power comes from the combination, tefillah and limud, prayer and learning. That's what transforms a person." Moshe was getting excited about a deeper concept, one that David couldn't quite understand. If a person prays and then learns halacha to come closer to Hashem, he'll begin to see things more clearly. "It's not just learning what's right and wrong," Moshe continued. "We're talking about a process that helps someone become the kind of person who chooses right instead of choosing wrong. Learning and praying in this manner changes you. It cleanses the soul." David nodded at the time. He hadn't fully grasped it then. Not really. But now he was beginning to feel it. While he was learning down here, something was shifting above. Something fundamental was changing within his soul. It wasn't intellectual. It was higher. Like music, it stirred something in him, even if he couldn't name the chords. It became a habit. Instead of scrolling the news or checking emails for offers he'd never use, he opened his Shulchan Aruch and read. Sometimes it was a pasuk from the weekly Torah portion that grounded him. On other days, a few verses from the Siddur while waiting for his coffee to brew. A page of Gemara here, saying Tehillim before a call there, even if it was just one line. It wasn't easy. The words felt anxious, sometimes distant, but over time they became familiar. He couldn't name exactly what was changing, but something was. Not just how he thought, but who he was becoming. It was these new rhythms, small moments of connection woven into his day, that began to form a coat of armor that he was beginning to wear. Something that wrapped around his spirit and steadied him through the day's uncertainties. Not a shield of certainty, but of steadiness. Instead of scrolling through Wall Street Journal comments, he reached for the prayer book. Did I ever actually learn anything from the news that changed my life, he wondered? Or is it just entertainment, something to distract me or make me feel productive? The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Most deals came down to something else. Who he bumped into at the gym, who booked a meeting that day. Something unseen was moving the needle more than any headline. It reminded him of the first job he had ever gotten. He hadn't even applied. Someone had stumbled on his resume in a pile destined for the recycling bin. The only reason they'd paused? His name sounded familiar. It wasn't his degree, wasn't his connections. That same morning, the newspaper had read, "Real estate markets brace for downturn." But David got the job, against the market, against the logic. It was something else. He flicked through the comments under a Wall Street Journal article, half-baked opinions dressed up as insight. People flexing their ego, seeking attention, he thought. The wisdom in the Torah, according to Rabbi Bergstein, it had either been reasoned through the Torah's 13 principles or spoken directly by God at Sinai. These words had been preserved by sages who risked everything to carry them forward. Their staying power spoke volumes. The Wall Street Journal is only 135 years old, its headlines forgotten within days. But this had endured for thousands of years. Torah was the only thing he'd ever invested in that promised a return, not just in this life, but beyond it. He'd begun to notice the ones who seemed most grounded weren't chasing headlines. They were rooted in this. And maybe that's why, David thought, that the Jewish people, despite their small numbers, had such an outsized impact, not just in business or science or ethics, but in resilience. Maybe it wasn't culture or IQ as he'd been led to believe. Maybe it was this daily study, this relentless return to the source. They were nourished by something deeper, and now he was beginning to feel nourished by it too. Another truth floated back to him. When you pray, you talk to God. When you learn, God talks to you.
People at the office notice. At the office, David had a reputation for being all business. No chit-chat, no pleasantries. When he spoke to someone, it was like watching a surgeon. Get in, fix the issue, move on. While others made small talk, David combed through spreadsheets and expense reports like a man possessed. Even when he socialized, it was transactional. What can this person do for me? But lately, he was spending less time buried in Excel, less time lecturing at the whiteboard, less time tearing through someone's P&L line by line. Michael, the eloquent Brit who'd just crossed the pond to join David's team, pulled him aside. "David, I don't mean to pry," which of course meant that he did. "But are you all right? I may be out of line, but your precision, it's slipping. Are you still sweating every detail?" But others noticed something different. Someone passed by and said, "Good morning." And for once, David said it back, with a smile. That didn't go unnoticed either.
Scene: Shabbat shopping. On Friday afternoon, David was walking down the street, a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in forever. As he passed Gabi's Delicatessen, a small Yemenite bodega on the corner of 13th and A, something caught his eye. He found himself inside, standing at the hot bar, scooping ladles of rich hameen, the Sephardic version of cholent, made with beans, meat, potatoes, and warm spices, into a large container. The aroma filled the air: cinnamon, garlic, cumin, memory. It reminded him of being a little boy, growing up in Brooklyn, his mother cooking on their small, old-fashioned gas stove, stirring a bubbling pot. That tiny kitchen, the cracked tile floor, the folding card table set for Shabbat. He added warm pitas and a pair of fresh challahs to the haul, stacking them neatly at the register along with the stew. When he got back to the office, it was around noon. He put the hameen and challah on the counter in the office kitchen. On his smartphone, he typed a message to the office email list. Surprise in the kitchen. He pressed send. Then he stood there, quiet for a moment. He smiled to himself. There was something about it, this small attempt at bringing joy to others, that let out a breath he didn't even know he'd been holding. Within minutes, people began to trickle in. Typical, thought David, as the usual suspects gathered first. Jeff, the schmoozer from BizDev, Aaron, the fast talker from sales, that new intern who never remembered names. But then something else happened. Jacob came in. Jacob, the hardest worker who never left his desk. Then Mark, then Amet. The three of them, the quiet engine of the accounting department. Their faces looked worn from the week, but when they lifted the lids, something softened. Hameen, my grandma used to make this. That smell, it takes me back. They didn't stay long, just a few minutes, but when they left with smiles on their faces. Something had lifted. David stood off to the side, watching. Better get more next time, he thought.
Scene. The ripple effect. David is changing the way he relates to people and life. The next Monday, David arrived to find a pile of leaves blocking the front entrance. His instinct was to grab his phone and fire off a text to Olaf, the janitor. The idiot, he thought. He's supposed to take care of this. What are my employees going to think if the place looks like a hiking trail? But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the outdoor broom leaning near the wall. For some reason he couldn't explain, he walked over, picked it up, and swept. 2 minutes, that's all it took. What he couldn't see was how that small choice, the pause, the broom, the sweeping, was already echoing outward, quietly folding into something larger. 30 miles away, at that exact moment, Olaf was dropping his son off at school. His wife had taken ill, though they didn't yet know it was morning sickness from a surprise pregnancy. Normally, Olaf would have been tense, frustrated that he had to miss work to drive carpool. He would have made a comment like, "Can't you get it together? It's all falling on my shoulders." But this morning, something was different. The pressure wasn't there, or at least not as loud. Instead, he pulled out his phone and found his fingers typing a different kind of message to his wife. "Hope you feel better, my love." He even surprised himself and added a heart emoji. He smiled softly. The kindness felt almost effortless, a shift he couldn't explain, but somehow it felt right. Little did Olaf know, David's small moment of patience, his choice to sweep, had sparked a ripple, a tiny shift in Olaf's home, a softer morning, a bit more breath in a woman carrying new life. Could it really be? Could that moment have meant something? It was just a moment, but moments have wings, and this one was already in flight. Something about Moshe. There was a new rhythm at the office these past few months. Deals were still moving, a big closing on the Upper West Side. An old client, thought to be long gone, came back with a check and a smile. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was something else. The surprise cholent, the sweeping, David saying good morning and meaning it. People were smiling more. The place felt warmer. the energy lighter. But at home, it still weighed heavy. His wife's sadness hung in the air like unspoken prayers. Her frustration, the silence, the long sighs between words. After all the silence, all the tension, her warmth never quite returned. Earlier that morning, at shul, Yankee was celebrating the Brit Milah of his firstborn son. David grabbed a bagel and smeared it with cream cheese. He stood off to the side of the room, half listening and half not listening to a few guys talking about real estate. Moshe was near the coffee table, dressed sharply as always, but there was something different in his face. His posture lighter, his smile deeper. David had known him for many years, admired his deals, his savvy. Moshe wasn't just successful. He was one of the few guys David actually listened to. Once a rival, now a mystery. Moshe hadn't just kept up. He'd quietly pulled ahead. Bigger deals, deeper pockets, and lately, something else. A calm David couldn't quite place. He remembered a time when Moshe looked more ragged, puffier, always furrowed in thought. Now, he looked like he was carrying less, a lot less, less on his shoulders, in his face, maybe even in his soul. David took a bite of his bagel. "What's your secret?" he asked. Moshe grinned, patting his stomach. 20 minutes on the treadmill. That, and I don't finish the second bagel. David smirked. "No, seriously, man. You look like you sleep like a baby. Are you always this chill after pulling a permit for a 40-story hotel?" Moshe's smile softened. His eyes went still. "Honestly, I've been working less." David raised an eyebrow. "Less?" "Yeah," Moshe said, adding a slice of lox into his bagel. "And weirdly, it's working. Business is fine. Better than fine." David blinked. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or ask him to explain. Moshe took a deep breath, then said it straight. "I heard Michael Safdie on his podcast say, I only work about 3 hours a day. The blessing comes from my Torah learning." David paused mid-chew. Moshe continued, "And it got me thinking. I've been trying it, showing up at Shir in the mornings, even started a chavruta with one of the guys, just the two of us learning a page together every morning." David was quiet. Moshe continued, more gently now. "There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, says, whoever accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah, the yoke of government and worldly burdens will be removed from him." He shrugged. "I always thought that was just a nice idea, but lately it's feeling real. It's like, I don't know, Hashem takes the pressure off." He smiled again and looked down at the bagel in his hand. "Also, this right here." He held it up like a prize. "Lox and cream cheese. Another benefit of hanging around with the right crowd." David laughed, but it didn't shake the ache inside of him. Moshe gave his shoulder a gentle pat. "You should try it," he said, his eyes twinkling. And then he drifted off into the crowd. David stood still, chewing slowly, his mind turning over what he'd just heard. He had dismissed ideas like this before, called them old school, mystical fluff. But Moshe wasn't fluff. Moshe built skyscrapers, closed impossible deals, out-negotiated city officials. If Moshe was saying this, maybe there was something to it. Moshe's words didn't just bounce off, they stuck. They walked him home. They were still with him when he stepped through the door of his penthouse apartment later that night. Scene. Mitzvot at home. The words were still with him later as he pushed open the front door to their penthouse apartment and tried to slip in quietly, part not wanting to wake anyone, part not wanting to be bothered. He liked having the nights to himself, no questions, no requests, no lists. Tonight, he planned to review the Madison and Fifth Development prospectus his team had prepared. The business was growing, and David wanted to keep it that way. This week alone, he had closed a 1,200-unit luxury Manhattan residential project that flanked the Upper West Side of Central Park. The deal he had cut to rescue the previous owners from distress had made him something of a local legend. Madison and Fifth was to be the next in a string of victories. But here at home, his wife had taken to reminding him about mitzvot at home. "You're doing good for your investors," she'd yell at him. But one good deed at home is worth more than 1,000 good deeds out there in the world. By the time he got home, the lights were dim. On the counter, 2 plates, one untouched, one half-eaten, probably hours ago. She had probably been excited to serve it to him, but by now she was already asleep. As he tiptoed, a voice came from the living room, soft and drowsy. "You're always out making things happen, but I'm lonely, David. It's like we live on 2 separate islands." He turned. She was curled up on the sofa, talking in her sleep, the throw blanket bunched at her waist. He hadn't noticed her when she came in. Did he ever really notice her? He stood, frozen. The fact that she was half asleep made him trust the authenticity of what she was saying. When she was awake, he discounted her complaints as bargaining chips in a grand negotiation. But now she wasn't angling. This was her actual truth, the one whispered by the still, small voice inside of her, the one she must have had to sit with in those quiet moments when she was alone and he was at the office. He walked over to the sofa and tried to rouse her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Come, honey, let me bring you to your bed." "You're..." The word hit him mid-sentence, before he could pull it back. He hadn't meant to say it, it just came out that way, a tacit acknowledgement that they had grown apart. It didn't even feel like his bed anymore. She looked at him in her sleepy, wide-eyed haze, smiled, for a second forgetting about the heaviness, registering instead his familiar face, which she always had thought would be her home. But then, quickly, once again, her lips turned upside down into a frown, the heaviness rushing back in. How many late nights had she spent waiting for David on this very sofa? His hand was still extended. She weighed whether she could take it, trust it. Then her eyes closed and her hand fell limp. He gently lifted her in his arms, slowly, carefully. She was lighter than he remembered. Carried her to the bedroom, laid her down, pulled the blanket over her, then quietly closed the door behind him. Back in the kitchen, he put the cold food into the refrigerator. He touched the wall for balance, for stillness. But his body gave way, knees bending, head lowering, heart cracking. He slid down the wall until he hit the floor and began to cry. He looked up at the sky outside and groaned, "God, why is it so hard?" He sat there for a while, and then, without quite meaning to, his mind drifted back to shul that very morning. Moshe's voice, like a seed planted in his head. "I only work a few hours a day. The blessing comes from the Torah." It had sounded naive to him at the time, but now, with his wife asleep behind that closed bedroom door, those words landed differently. Maybe he had been too focused on working harder, on pushing through, on doing more, fixing more, proving more. He had always credited his success to his own intelligence and discipline, the long hours, the sharp thinking, the Ivy League education. But was it really helping? The success, the deals, did they really come because of all the effort? Or had he been mistaking the pipeline for the source? And from a quiet place, a memory surfaced, a voice from long ago, his grandfather, Meir. If you're a Jew, your first job is being a Jew, a husband, a father, a member of the community. Your business is just the vehicle through which Hashem sends you blessings and sustenance. But it's not the heart of who you are. And here, as if it were yesterday, David could see him rise slightly from his seat, hand tapping the table for emphasis. It's not the source of your wealth. He had forgotten those early conversations with Grandpa Meir, the ones he used to love so much as a boy. Forgotten how clear and steady his grandfather's voice always sounded, like it came from somewhere deeper than opinion. But tonight the words came back, and they didn't just make sense, they felt true. Scene: the second Cholent incident. Finally, Friday rolled around. It had been a long week, and Shabbat couldn't come soon enough. As David strolled past the conference room, he heard voices. There's no meeting scheduled, he thought, double-checking his smartwatch. Curious, he entered the room. To his surprise, a small aluminum baking pan filled with homemade cholent sat on the table,
flanked by a few bottles of Diet Coke and a plastic bag of mini store-bought challah rolls. "Hey, David," said Emmett, stepping forward with a plate in hand. "It's my turn. My wife made this for the office. She's been looking forward to it all week. I guess you could say I was outvoted at home." He chuckled, then added with mock resignation, "Resistance was futile." The look in his eyes said it all. "You're still with us, right?" David caught on right away. Wow, they really enjoyed that taste of Shabbat last week, he thought to himself. He glanced around. The others were watching, faces a mix of anticipation and uncertainty, waiting to see how David would respond. "Should we make this a regular thing?" David asked aloud, gesturing towards the cholent. The room fell silent. Everyone was waiting for someone else to respond first. David read the room. They wanted it, but no one wanted to be the first to say so. "How about we take turns bringing in cholent on Fridays? Anyone want to help organize it?" said David. For a beat, no one moved. Then, nearly a dozen hands shot up. David blinked. Even Olaf. David hadn't seen that coming. He looked around, the way their eyes lit up, especially the ones who had tried the cholent. Was it the stew or something deeper? The faces were lighter, the room softer. Had this small act done that? "All right," David said, smiling. "Olaf, Emmett, and Reynolds, you're on next week. After that, we'll rotate." He paused, then added, "I'll put the sign-up sheet up myself. Give me a minute." The tension in the room melted into a buzz of friendly chatter. Someone made a joke about getting their grandmother's recipe. A bottle of seltzer fizzed. Very interesting, David thought to himself. He told them they could expect a few more surprises on Friday afternoons. He even found himself looking forward to it.
Scene: a stick in Hashem's hands. Late Thursday morning, David was sitting at his desk when the intercom crackled. "Mr. Marks, Doug Emioff is here." I showed him to the conference room. Doug Emioff, vice president of the bank? David double-checked his calendar. As he'd thought, no meeting was scheduled. An unexpected visit from his banker was rarely good news. David rushed to tighten his tie. He leaned over and pressed the intercom. "Send him to my office. Send him to my office. Send him to my office." Seconds later, the door opened. "Hi, David. Nice to see you," Doug said, his flushed red cheeks and easy grin doing their best to soften what was clearly a surprise visit. "Can I offer you some water, some soda?" David asked politely. "I have ginger ale, Evian." "Perhaps another time," said Doug, cutting him off, though his "Perhaps another time," said Doug, cutting him off, though his tone stayed friendly. "I don't have too much time, David. I've got to make my rounds this morning." A pause. Doug shifted in a matter-of-fact tone. A pause. Doug shifted into a matter-of-fact tone. A pause. Doug shifted into a matter-of-fact tone. The bank had changed policy. Interest rates were tightening. Everything was under review. And just like that, like a wheel flipping, David's whole mood turned. His stomach dropped. The refinance he'd been counting on, off the table. The new projects, especially the one at 5th and Madison, on pause. The future of the company, the vision he had so carefully mapped out, was suddenly in question. He felt his collar tight. Panic coursed through him. Then a surge of anger. This came out of nowhere, he thought. The government, the banks, they're always coming for me. This is what I get for being so generous, for lightening up. So much for truant and office parties. His mouth opened, ready to snap. "You know what, Doug?" But as he shifted in his chair, his hand brushed against something on his desk. He glanced down. His Shar HaBitachon, still open, still there. He paused. The words caught in his throat. His breath steadied, just a little. The rage loosened its grip. This wasn't random. This was a test. David didn't move, just stared at the book. The anger was still there, flickering, raw, but something deeper was rising up to meet it. A softness, a steadiness. His eyes stayed on the cover. He could still hear Doug's voice. Words like exposure, risk models, policy shift. But it all felt far away now. The teachings he had been absorbing clicked into place. While the banker continued speaking, David knew Doug was just a stick in Hashem's hands. The voice of Michael Safdie played in his head. "The guy in front of you, he's nothing but a bag of hot air. Really, he's a stick in Hashem's hands. When a dog gets hit, it blames the stick. Stop. Don't be a dog. Act like a human being. Look up. It's all min hashamayim, all from heaven." Almost naturally, surprising even himself, David's mind switched gears. Safdie's voice from yesterday's podcast had landed just in time. Hashem is squeezing you because he wants your heart. He wants you to come to him, talk to him, ask him for help. There is no greater kavod, no greater honor for Hashem than helping you in your time of need. Now, instead of stressing over the words the banker was saying, David watched Doug's lips moving, his head bobbing up and down, the words coming out in slow motion. It almost made David laugh out loud, but out of respect, he held it in and smiled silently to himself. David turned his focus upward toward his loving, kind Father in heaven. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you for sending this challenge my way. I love you, and I know you love me. I accept whatever you are throwing my way. I know it's for my good. Teach me what you want me to learn here. Help me pass this test. I am relying on you. I have nowhere else to turn. I trust you won't let me down. Doug continued his speech, smiling politely at David, emotionless, uncaring, as if he were reading from a weather chart, even though the forecast he was delivering could wreck David's future plans. But it was different now. David was a different David. All of the learning he had done since that first sleepless night when he wandered into early morning shul, all of it began to flood in. That slow, steady exposure from Moshe over bagels, from the rabbi's weekly teachings, from the lines of Tehillim that wrapped him, from the voices of the men at shul, from the Torah pages that seemed to land in his hands at exactly the right time, from being in the right place at the right time, from the Torah pages that seemed to land in his hands exactly when he needed them, from being in the right place at the right time, because Hashem had put him there. It had all accumulated. All of it was working on him through osmosis, through reading, through surrender. Even the simple mitzvah of bringing a fellow Jew cholent on a Friday afternoon, even that had changed something in the upper worlds. And now he was standing in this moment, seeing things from a different place entirely. Because of all that, David felt in his bones that this situation, though seemingly falling apart, was part of a greater plan. That very morning, another perfectly timed message had dropped along his path. Before leaving the house, he had an urge for one more minute of learning, to linger over his coffee, reading just one more page in the Chumash. And when he turned the page, he flipped to a commentary from the Midrash Rabbah in the Tauber Chumash. And it was in that time the sons of Jacob were engaged in selling Joseph. Reuven was occupied with sackcloth and fasting. Jacob was mourning. Judah was busy taking a wife. And God was creating the light of the Mashiach. And now he was so glad he had listened to that still, tiny voice that told him to stay a moment longer. We need to learn how to think. That's why we learn Torah, Safti had said. And because of that, because he had started learning to think through the lens of Torah, David could see clearly that this test unfolding before him must have a deeper purpose. A surge of gratitude rose up. He felt the tension empty out of his shoulders. The tightness in his face softened. He took a deep breath. He knew that the challenges were nothing new for his family, the Jewish people. Like every Jew, he was a child of Abraham, part of an unbroken chain that had always been protected by God, rising and prospering through the chaos. One line from the morning prayers always stood out to him. You have always been the help of our fathers, a shield and a deliverer to them and their children after them in every generation. You have always been the help of our fathers, a shield and a deliverer to them and their children after them in every generation. You have always been the help of our fathers, a shield and a deliverer to them and their children after them in every generation. You have always been the help of our fathers, a shield and a deliverer to them and their children after them in every generation. His forefathers had faced the same thing, or worse. The Torah was filled with moments that looked like disasters, but were actually the setup for something far greater. Abraham being told to sacrifice his only son, Yaakov grieving for the son he thought he'd lost forever, the Jews being sold into slavery, and yet those were the very steps that led to redemption, because by relying on Hashem, sticking with Hashem, those challenges had built them, not broken them. If you zoomed out, he thought, it was all part of a plan. If Joseph had never been sold to Egypt, the Jews would never have been enslaved and never left with the Torah. The sale of Joseph was the first domino, the first shadow in a chain that led to light. Even as the first exile of Egypt was unfolding, God was already arranging that Moshe would redeem them. That's when it really hit him. Just as the seeds of redemption were being planted in the darkest moments of Joseph's story, so too must the seeds of salvation be taking root right now, right in the middle of this mess with Doug as the messenger. Life was always macro and micro. What happened to the nation echoed in the individual. And David knew this moment was no exception. If you walked into a studio and saw a painting halfway done, the rabbi had said, just some streaks of yellow and blue across a white canvas, you might think it's just a bunch of random schmears. But wait, let the artist finish. Only then do you see the full picture. Doug's speech wrapped up. He stood and shook David's hand. David made sure to be kind. This is just business, he reminded himself. I'm an emissary of Hashem. I represent him in this world. David walked the banker to the door and closed it softly behind him. David returned to his desk, reached for Shara Bitachon, and opened to a dog-eared page he had read 100 times. Bitachon provides many spiritual benefits and many worldly benefits. He took a deep breath and continued reading. Among the spiritual benefits are, one attains peace of mind and a sense of reliance upon Hashem in the way a servant must rely on his master. If one fails to rely completely on Hashem, he must inevitably rely on someone else or on his own prowess, and then Hashem withdraws his providence. David shuddered. That's no longer my story. He kept reading. Among the worldly benefits of bitachon, one is relaxed about his business matters, even if he suffers setbacks. He exhaled slowly, let the words settle. The room was still, his breath calm. Relief washed over him. He closed the book gently and then rested his hand on the cover. He looked up and whispered, "Thank you." Scene. David makes a series of decisions, but from a different place than usual. David felt drawn to act, but not with his usual barrage of frenzied calculations. Instead of barking orders at his team, sending off a flurry of emails and phone calls, or plotting out defensive financial maneuvers, he found himself sitting still. A strange calm settled over him. He felt more rooted than ever, even in the face of this challenge. There's no reason to be down, he told himself. We know everything is from Hashem. I've been learning, thank God. How would Rav Shlomo Arush react? That's our model. How would Michael Safdie respond? Those are our teachers. His next steps emerged with surprising clarity. He would double down on his Gemara study, He picked up his phone and texted Moshe, "Do you want to learn with me before shul tomorrow morning?" Almost instantly, his phone buzzed back. "Yes." David smiled. "Meet you there. What time?" And then, like a bolt of clarity, the teaching flashed in his mind. Whoever withholds charity, the money will leave him another way. The wisdom from months of studying was returning now, wrapping around him like spiritual armor. With renewed purpose, he composed an email to his accountant. "How much were my charitable contributions last year? Did I reach the recommended 20%? He knew he hadn't. He almost cried, but it wasn't from fear. It was relief. At least now he knew what to do. He picked up his phone again. This time he texted his wife. "Honey, I want to sponsor Kiddush at shul next week. Do you want the joy of arranging it?" Almost instantly, "I thought you'd never ask." He smiled. He knew it was a double mitzvah, a chance for her to shine, and a down payment on what he owed to Hashem for all of his success. "Okay, let's go all out," he replied, a smiley face in return. These challenges will come and go, he thought to himself, but now I know who I am. Then another flash, his grandfather's voice. "A Jew is a Jew first. The rest, doctor, lawyer, whatever, that's just the sideshow." And suddenly, David finally understood what his grandfather had meant. Of course, a Jew builds vessels, buildings, businesses, investments. That's his hishtadlut, the effort he's expected to make. But the vessel is just a decoy, an external form, like Gadel Fencer had taught. The blessing doesn't come from the job or the market or the strategy. The true blessing comes from Hashem. The Jew is obligated to build the vessel, but he must never rely on it. He must rely only on Hashem to fill it. That's what transforms the effort, the vessel, into a container in waiting, ready to receive. Not from hustle, but from faith, from trust, from bitachon. That's the formula. That's the truth. A teaching he had once read resurfaced, this time with force. Of primary importance is God's blessing, and the blessings are earned by acting in a way appropriate for a Jew, that is, praying with a minyan, keeping Shabbat and Kashrut vigilantly, and educating their children under the guidance of God-fearing teachers. Hayom Yom 4th Av. This was it. This was the model. Not hustle, not overcalculation. Bitachon, mitzvot, alignment. That's what opens the gates. The rest? That's just window dressing. Scene. Reliance. He told no one. Things had been going so well with his team, David didn't want to ruffle any feathers, didn't want to let them know what had happened with the bank. No panic, no memo, no war room. He just kept going. But in quiet moments, a surge of doubt would puncture his calm resolve. That's when David got to work. Not the old kind of work, calls, spreadsheets, negotiations. The real work. "Please, Hashem," he would whisper, "please increase my bitachon in you. Let me trust and rely on you completely." For chizuk, he listened to daily bitachon on WhatsApp, short, fiery voice notes from Safti, a man who had become something of a mentor. Safti wasn't a rabbi or a rebbe in the traditional sense. He was something else, a businessman who had tasted both sides of life, who had walked away from pressure and performance and chosen bitachon, a modern-day messenger of Shar HaBitachon, translating ancient truths into the language of balance sheets and quarterly projections. He had replaced the voices David used to follow, guys who promised that more hours, more hustle, and more pressure would bring more profit. Now, instead of worry, David knew. Only to God should you hope, my soul, for my hope is from him. Meanwhile, his friends were whipping themselves into a frenzy. More meetings, more bankers, more late nights, more steak dinners. They got together for lunch, complaining about the economy, the interest rate environment, the tariffs, waiting, each of them, for the other guy to bail them out. David saved his breath. He used his lips for something else. The power of a Jew is in his lips. Psalm 121, over and over. From where will my help come? As the deadline approached, David increased his efforts. He dove deeper into Hitbodedut, speaking to Hashem in his own words. He would take walks, talk like a child to his father. I trust you. I know this is for my good. Please, Hashem, show me what to do. His friends were spiraling. You could see it in their faces, the bags under their eyes. They were going to self-help seminars, walking on coals, chanting mantras. Some were in therapy multiple times a week. Others were hiring expensive coaches and consultants. They were hoping someone or some secret technique would save them. David watched them run in circles, and one thought kept returning. If one fails to rely completely on Hashem, he must inevitably rely on someone else or on his own prowess, and then Hashem withdraws his providence. If only they knew. But David felt something else. He felt a calm peace spreading over him. He was surprised that he was sleeping so well at night. He felt that thing he had always wanted to feel, reliance. He began waking up early, not with anxiety, but with energy. You should awaken the dawn. He became one of the first 10 at Nets, the early morning minyan. He finally understood what it meant to pray at sunrise, the precise moment darkness transforms into light. He saw his friends posting images from kosher steakhouses, networking, courting bankers, and he wondered, weren't those dinner bills only adding to the pressure? Instead of fancy dinners, David sat with his Gemara. When you pray, you're talking to God. When you learn, God talks to you. The more conversations with God, the better. He joined a WhatsApp group that encouraged learning one halacha a day. At first, it just felt like structure, a new way to build some rhythm into the chaos. But then, something shifted. As he studied, he could feel it. Something was changing. Too deep, or maybe too high, for his rational mind to grasp. He remembered what Rebbe Meir had told him, quoting Rebbe Nachman. Even when you don't fully understand the Torah you read, you are reprogramming yourself, changing things in the worlds above. He was becoming stronger. He finally understood what Rabbi Lazer Brody, Shalom Arush's student, had meant. This is divine wisdom. In contrast to Greek philosophy, Torah doesn't end where reason ends. It begins there. He remembered the line that had struck him most. Divine wisdom begins where human logic stops. He had saved the email. He opened it and again reread. In total opposite of Greek philosophy, Torah scholarship is based on the fact that our feeble human intellect, as high as it might be on the IQ scale, is still human intelligence. Divine wisdom is far beyond the realm of limited human intellect and only begins where human logic reaches its upper limits. In that respect, a secular Supreme Court judge in Israel would encounter extreme difficulty in understanding a basic point in Torah jurisprudence. Why? He thinks like an ancient Greek and doesn't believe in anything that he cannot see or grasp. He not only refuses to accept any notion of a higher power than human intellect, but he sneers at the idea. A classic case at hand was when Israel's Supreme Court Justice Yitzhak Amit agreed to allow one of Torah's most severe violations, chametz on Passover or army bases. In unprecedented arrogance and ridicule, he termed our holiday of Passover a 7-day matzah diet. David didn't just feel sad reading that, he felt awake. The days passed, deadlines loomed, bankers circled. The pressure around him grew. But David felt held. Scene: making time for a dinner date. The deadline for his loan repayment was less than a week away. The late morning sun spilled across David's desk, lighting up a spreadsheet, a sealed envelope from his attorney, and a framed photo of Miriam laughing, wind in her hair. The building buzzed around him, phones ringing, footsteps echoing, laughter from a distant conference room. Just beneath his computer monitor sat a worn Siddur with folded corners. At 11:43 a.m., the email had come in. Subject: final bank update, no extension. Body: spoke to counsel. The payment must be received by the 15th. No exceptions. He'd read it twice already. No room for delay. Payment due. Period. The screen dimmed. He tapped it to life again, then pushed the phone away. For a split second, the old instinct rose. Tight chest, heat behind the eyes. But he caught it. Like a child who knows his father is in the next room. He closed his eyes for a beat and whispered, "Abba, I know this is from you, and I know you've got me." The fear melted, not because the pressure was gone, but because he wasn't carrying it alone. Outside his glass office walls, the world hummed with deadlines and deals. Inside, David felt still, whole. Miriam had been asking for a date night for weeks. She'd been glowing since the Kiddush, not just from the compliments, but from the feeling that he saw her, trusted her. She felt something different in him lately, a strength, a steadiness, and it drew her toward him, gentle like a magnet. "Have time to go out to dinner with me tonight?" she texted him. The text landed. At first, the reflex, "I don't have time for this," rose briefly, but he swatted it down. That voice belonged to someone else now. "Absolutely," he typed back. On the other end of the phone, like a lightning bolt had come through the line, an electrified smile exploded on her face. A tear came from her eye. Maybe electricity and water did mix, after all. He didn't just say yes. This time, he wasn't checking a box. He meant to make it special. There was a place she'd always wanted to go. David had resisted forever. Too far, it's a hole in the wall. And on top of that, falafel. He couldn't understand it. Why schlep all the way into the city for a tiny little falafel spot? Wasn't falafel the thing you grabbed while rushing around Israel at some food stand when you didn't feel like making a reservation? But tonight it felt okay. When they arrived, the dining room was narrow and dim, like a side street in Jerusalem after hours, rough stucco walls doing their best impression of real stone. He'd built enough stone facades to know the difference, but the lone slab of actual Jerusalem stone on the back wall, even David had to admit, was a nice touch. The place was nearly empty, a humming refrigerator, the smell of cumin and oil, the scraping of a spoon against a metal tray. They sat across from each other at a small table by the window. The menu was taped to the wall in Hebrew and English. Miriam dipped a piece of pita into the bowl of tahina, her fingers brushing against the edge like she'd done it 1,000 times. She looked calm, not glowing, just calm. Somehow, it was the most beautiful thing he'd seen all week. "I think you'd like this sabich," she said, eyes flicking up. "I'll take whatever you're having," he replied. He wasn't here for the food. 2 lemonades sat between them, sweating in plastic cups. David left his phone face down on the table. She folded her napkin. It's been a long time since you just showed up. I'm trying, David said. A pause. Then, the kiddish came out nice. He nodded. Everyone talked about the desserts. But even more than that, they noticed how kind you were, how comfortable you made everyone feel. He hesitated. You did an amazing job. She looked away, the same faint smile pulling at her lips. I didn't know if you'd let me plan something again, she said. Please do, he said. The world needs you. More hesitation. Then it needs us. Watching her across the table, shoulders relaxed, hair slightly undone from the wind, David felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. He felt present. You doing okay, she asked. He nodded. Learning helps. Reminds me where I stand. She gave a quiet nod. Between them, the silence was warm. In that silence, he felt Hashem. A pause from above. After the meal, David stood and walked up to the counter to pay. He still wasn't used to places like this. No waiter, no check brought to the table, just a credit card machine on a white Formica countertop. He slid his card. Nothing. Tried again. Chip, swipe, tap. Still nothing. The clerk looked up. Sorry, it's not working. Must be the Wi-Fi again. David stared at the machine. Seriously? The deadline was days away. Pressure mounting by the hour. And now he was stuck here, blocked by a $9 falafel plate and a broken card reader. The one thing standing between him and the door. The heat rose to his shoulders. The thought hit sharp and fast. They're wasting my time in this dump. Everyone's always wasting my time. About to rage, but then David kicked back. He pushed the thought away, mid-flight. He glanced back toward the table. From across the room, Miriam was smiling softly, unaware of the delay, still hopeful. Her almond-shaped eyes sparkled like she still believed this night could go well, still believed in him. It hit him.
She looked like she had stepped out of that photo on his desk, the one from the park, the one she had taken while looking at him, half smiling, head tilted slightly, that soft, open look she used to give him, like he was the safest place in the world.
That version of her, the one he used to protect, used to show up for, was still right there. And he wasn't about to ruin that. Not this time. He let out a breath. Felt himself fill with gratitude for her smile, for the chance to still be her hero. As he traded the frustration for surrender, his lips moved by a new instinct, turning the tension into prayer, a quiet surrender, so something higher could enter. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you for this challenge, he whispered. The owner came out from the kitchen, looking frazzled. I'm so sorry. Our roof was leaking and they had to go up to fix it. Must have cut the power to the Wi-Fi router again. Third time this month. These guys are so sloppy. He rubbed his temples and sighed. Every time it rains, same story. They go up to patch the roof and end up messing with the line that powers the Wi-Fi antenna. It's mounted up there. One bad step and boom, no signal. Credit card machine dead. Online orders frozen. We lose time. We lose sales. Last week, 2 hours of orders gone. And a line of customers here who couldn't even pay. We didn't catch it until it was too late. He shook his head. The worst part, the repairs never hold. We've tried 3 contractors this year. Still, no solution. David could see it clearly now. the exhaustion in Lev's face. This wasn't a one-off. It wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a slow bleed, months of disruption, frustration, and financial loss. David's face softened. He looked Lev in the eye, voice steady, gentle. That's a serious problem for your operations. Lev groaned. Tell me about it. It's like I'm throwing money down the drain. One fix leads to another break. Last month, we lost power for hours. It never ends. And that's when it clicked. Maybe I can help, David said.
Tzedakah, he told himself. Something for the little guy. Thank goodness I'm in a position to help. I can send my roofing guy, he added. He's solid, handles all of our buildings. And he's set up more than a few Wi-Fi systems in his time. He turned around, looked back at the table, hoping the whole scene hadn't spoiled the night. But Miriam had caught the whole thing. Lev's rant wasn't exactly quiet, and still, she was beaming. She didn't say anything, just looked at him. Something soft in her eyes, like, there you are.
Scene. David shows up. It was a snowy, gray day when David showed up at Moishe's Falafel. The wind whipped along deserted city streets. The morning snow had turned wet and slushy, the kind that dirtied shoes and slowed everything down. David stepped out of the work van, tugged his scarf tighter. He hadn't planned to be here. His foreman had called in sick. Given the weather, David didn't blame him. The job was small, too small for anyone on payroll to care about. Earlier that morning, Lev had sent another frantic text. Another outage, routers down again, please. David answered without hesitation. I'll come myself. In his heart, another voice echoed back. Hineni. Here I am. He didn't want to disappoint his wife. He wanted to show up for her, for Lev, for Hashem, for who he was becoming. Pushing aside the bitter cold, the looming bank deadline, and everything else he thought he should be doing, he strengthened himself, pulled himself into a good mood. Serve Hashem with joy, even on a snowy roof. And now, here he was, boots in snow, ready to supervise the job himself. Normally, this type of thing was beneath him, way beneath him. But today, he was glad he'd come. The ladder was slick with half-melted snow as he climbed to the falafel shop's roof. The job was straightforward, just a misaligned pitch and a vulnerable seal. A simple fix, but not one a rookie would catch. Fortunately, David and his crew were seasoned. They diagnosed it fast, handled it cleanly. An hour of labor, nothing more. David had even brought a new router from the office supply closet, a quiet gift. He figured he'd install it in Lev's office himself after the roof repair. But Lev was nowhere to be seen. Not once all morning. David could have left the router on the counter, but something about that felt like the old him, the rushed, too busy to care version. Now, he wanted to set it up right, wanted to see it work. He waited, just a little longer, still hoping Lev would appear. But when an hour had passed, he wiped his boots, started to leave. A click. A door at the back of the restaurant swung open. Lev emerged, not in his usual apron dusted with flour, but in a dark suit, pressed, dignified, slate blue, Italian cut, polished shoes. The cheerful chef was gone. In his place stood a man with the bearing of a CEO. His whole presence different. He carried himself with quiet authority now, like a man who belonged in a boardroom, not behind a counter. David blinked. "You look," Lev smiled, "like someone else. I get that a lot." Lev gestured to a small table in the back. "David," he said, "come, sit with me for a moment." He placed a folder on the table, thick, heavy, organized. "These are all of our locations, 126 across the country, and these," he tapped a labeled tab, "are the renovations we need. HVAC, roofs, wiring, the works." Lev looked up. "No one's been able to do it right, until now." Lev smiled, humble and sincere. "I didn't call you out of the blue," he said. "I was testing. I saw you that night, with your wife. When the card machine broke and I was falling apart, you didn't let her feel it. You stayed steady. You protected her, even when things got tense." He nodded toward the roof. "And today, same thing. You protected me. You came yourself, in the snow. You didn't send someone else. That matters." Final scene. No one knew but Hashem. David opened the binder. Page after page, blueprints, square footage, renovation phases, city codes, timelines. A napkin slipped out, creased, scribbled on, Lev's notes. He flipped it over. One figure caught his eye. Total estimated developer return, $100,792,792.67. His brow furrowed. He read it again. David blinked. His heart thudded in his chest, but not from panic. That number, the impossible total he owed the bank. Not rounded, not close, exact. He hadn't spoken it aloud to anyone but Hashem. Even the digits, 7, 9, 2. His wife's birthday, July 29th. David's breath caught in his throat, but it wasn't panic. It was something softer, lighter. And then he remembered what he'd read that morning, half awake over oatmeal and coffee. Shar HaBitachon, page 37. When one places his full trust in Hashem, all his burdens are lifted from him. Even the matters that seem to depend on worldly effort, those too are decided above. David looked up at Lev, who was still talking, still explaining. But David wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at Lev anymore. He was looking past him, through him, past the restaurant, past numbers and deals and deadlines and logic, through the fabric of nature itself, through the illusion of control and coincidence. David smiled. "Thank you for this opportunity to serve you," he said aloud. But he wasn't speaking to Lev. He was speaking to Hashem.